My name is Marjorie Waverly. At 78 years old, I've seen my share of life's cruelties and blessings. I spent 42 years as a high school mathematics teacher in the small town of Crestfall, Virginia, before retiring to a modest house on the edge of town. My husband Vernon passed away 5 years ago, leaving me with our savings, the house we'd paid off, and a teacher's pension that keeps the lights on. I have one daughter, Thalia, who's always been headstrong and determined, just like her father. Our relationship has been complicated, not terrible but strained in that way that happens when two stubborn women share the same blood but not always the same values. Thalia moved to Boston 15 years ago, pursuing a career in corporate finance that I never quite understood. Our calls became less frequent, our visits reduced to holidays and the occasional weekend. I've often wondered if I failed her somehow, if my dedication to other people's children came at the cost of my own. It was a Tuesday morning in October when my phone rang. The screen lit up with Thalia's name, unusual for a weekday morning. "Mom," she said, without even a hello, her voice tight with that controlled desperation I'd heard only a few times in her life. "I need to borrow some money." My heart immediately squeezed with worry. Thalia had never asked me for financial help before. Quite the opposite. She'd always been fiercely independent, refusing even birthday checks with a stubborn, "I'm doing fine, Mom." I asked her what was wrong, and her answer came after a long pause. "It's complicated. Business investment gone wrong. I need $100,000. The amount hit me like a physical blow. $100,000 was nearly half of what Vernon and I had managed to save over our lifetime of careful budgeting and modest living. It was my security, my protection against becoming a burden to Thalia or anyone else as I aged. It was the money that might someday pay for a nursing home or home health care if I became unable to manage alone. "That's a lot of money, Thalia," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Can you tell me more about what's happening? Maybe I can help in some other way." Her response was quick, almost rehearsed. "Mom, I can't get into the details right now. It's time sensitive. I promise I'll pay you back within a year, with interest. I just need you to wire the money today." Something in her voice set off alarm bells in my mind. In all my years of teaching, I developed a sense for when teenagers weren't telling me the whole truth. That same instinct was screaming now. Thalia wasn't sharing everything, and the pressure to decide immediately only heightened my suspicion. "I need some time to think about this," I told her. The line went quiet for a moment. "Mom, please. By tomorrow at the latest." I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the faded wallpaper Vernon and I had chosen together 30 years ago, wondering what my husband would advise me to do. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. We post new emotional family dramas every week that will touch your heart and make you think. Drop a comment about what you would do in Marjorie's situation. I spent that entire day in a state of anxiety I hadn't experienced since Vernon's final days in the hospital. My hands trembled as I made tea, spilling water on the countertop. I called my oldest friend, Beatrice, who's known me since we started teaching together in 1972. "Bea," I said, "something doesn't feel right." Beatrice has always been my voice of reason, the logical counterpart to my emotional nature. "Marge, if your gut is telling you something's off, listen to it," she advised. "Ask more questions. Don't let yourself be rushed." I knew she was right, but the thought of denying my only child in what might be a genuine crisis made my stomach twist with guilt. I pictured Thalia as a little girl, the time she fell off her bicycle and looked up at me with absolute trust that I would make everything better. But she wasn't a little girl anymore. She was a 45-year-old woman who had deliberately kept me at arm's length for years, who was now asking for an enormous sum without explanation. By evening, I had made my decision. I called Thalia back, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. "I'm sorry," I said, "but I can't send that money without understanding what it's for. It's too much, Thalia. It's nearly half of everything your father and I saved." The silence on the other end stretched until I wondered if the call had dropped. Then came her voice, cold and brittle like ice on a winter windshield. I should have known better than to ask. You've never been there when it really mattered. Forget I called. The accusation stung like a physical slap. Not been there? I'd spent my entire life trying to provide stability, encouragement, opportunities. I'd worked extra tutoring hours to pay for her dance lessons, her SAT prep courses, her first car. I'd sat up nights helping with homework, attending every school event, planning special birthdays, even when money was tight. How could she say I hadn't been there? Before I could respond, she hung up. I sat in my living room as darkness fell, not bothering to turn on the lights, feeling the weight of her words press down on me until I could hardly breathe. That night, I barely slept. I tossed and turned, replaying Thalia's words, questioning my decision. Had I made a terrible mistake? Should I call her back and agree? But the morning brought no clarity, only a text message that cut deeper than her words the night before. I'll figure it out myself. Always have. The dismissiveness in those 8 words summarized the gulf between us that had been widening for years. I sent back a message asking her to call me, to talk things through, but my phone remained silent. By afternoon, worry had begun to override my initial caution. I called Thalia's number, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message asking if she was all right, saying we could discuss options, but received no response. I even tried calling her office, only to be told by a receptionist that Miss Waverly was unavailable. The wall of silence felt deliberate, punishing. That evening, I called Beatrice again, tears finally breaking free after a day of anxiety. What if she really needed that money, Bea? What if something terrible happens because I said no? Beatrice's voice was gentle but firm. Marjorie, listen to me. You raised a smart, capable woman. If she needs money that badly, she has options besides pressuring her retired mother to hand over her life savings without explanation. Something doesn't add up here. I knew Beatrice was probably right, but the mother in me couldn't stop imagining worst-case scenarios. Was Thalia in some kind of trouble? Was she being coerced? Was she ill and not telling me? The questions multiplied through another sleepless night, until I finally fell into an exhausted sleep just before dawn. When I woke, I checked my phone immediately. No messages, no missed calls. The silence felt like a wall between us, one I wasn't sure how to breach without giving in to her demand, something my instincts still warned me against. I spent the day in a fog, going through the motions of my routine, watering plants, collecting mail, preparing a simple lunch I couldn't bring myself to eat. The house felt emptier than usual, echoing with the ghosts of old arguments and missed opportunities for connection. 2 days passed in a blur of worry and regret. I left more messages for Thalia, each one met with silence. I found myself wandering through my house, looking at photographs from happier times, Thalia's high school graduation, her college years, the last Christmas before Vernon got sick. Had I imagined the closeness I thought we once shared? On the afternoon of the second day, I called Thalia's neighbor in Boston, Elaine, with whom I'd maintained occasional contact over the years. Have you seen Thalia recently? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Is everything okay at her house? Elaine paused before answering. I saw her yesterday, actually. She was loading suitcases into her car. When I asked if she was going on a trip, she just said she needed a change of scenery. She seemed tense. This information did nothing to ease my concern. Suitcases? Where was she going? Why hadn't she told me? The questions multiplied, feeding my anxiety until it felt like a living thing inside my chest, consuming my thoughts, disrupting my sleep. That night, I dreamed of Vernon. We were sitting on our old porch swing, his arm around my shoulders, watching a sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. You did the right thing, Marge, he said in that steady way of his. Trust your instincts. I woke with tears on my pillow but a strange sense of calm. Vernon had always been my anchor, my North Star when decisions became clouded by emotion, even in dreams. His presence brought clarity. The morning of the third day dawned clear and crisp, a perfect autumn day in Virginia. I was finishing my morning coffee when my phone chimed with a text message. My heart jumped when I saw it was from Thalia. "We'll be in town tonight. Dinner at Riverside Inn, 7 p.m. No, please. No question mark. Just a statement that assumed my availability and agreement. Despite the commanding tone, relief flooded through me. She was coming home. We would talk face to face. Maybe then I could understand what was happening, what had driven her to ask for such a large sum of money. I spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation, changing outfits 3 times before settling on a simple blue dress that Vernon had always loved. I arrived at the Riverside Inn 15 minutes early, choosing a quiet table by the window overlooking the gentle flow of the Shenandoah River. The restaurant had been a special occasion place when Thalia was growing up. Birthdays, graduations, celebrations of all kinds. I wondered if she had chosen it deliberately, for the memories it held, or simply because it was the best restaurant in our small town. As I waited, I rehearsed what I would say, how I would explain my decision without sounding accusatory or doubtful of her integrity. I wanted to mend the rift between us, not widen it. At exactly 7 o'clock, the door opened and Thalia walked in. My breath caught in my throat. She looked thinner than when I'd last seen her 6 months ago, her face drawn with lines of stress I hadn't noticed before. But it wasn't just Thalia. Beside her walked a man I didn't recognize, tall with salt and pepper hair and an expensive-looking suit. Who was this stranger, and why had Thalia brought him to what I thought would be a private reconciliation dinner? As they approached my table, I noticed something else that sent a chill through me. Thalia wasn't looking me in the eye. Her gaze was fixed somewhere over my shoulder, her expression carefully neutral in a way that reminded me of Vernon when he was bracing himself to deal with difficult news. The man, by contrast, was smiling broadly, extending his hand as they reached the table. "Mrs. Waverly," he said warmly. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I'm Declan Merritt." Thalia finally met my gaze, and I saw something in her eyes I couldn't quite identify. Fear? Resignation? "Mom," she said, her voice tight. "There's something I need to tell you." In that moment, as the waiter appeared with menus, I had the distinct feeling that whatever happened next would change everything between us, perhaps forever. "Declan is my business partner," Thalia said after we'd ordered our meals, her fingers nervously twisting the napkin in her lap. The revelation surprised me. She had never mentioned a partner in any of our conversations about her financial consulting business. Declan smiled at me with perfect white teeth that seemed too large for his narrow face. "Thalia and I have been working together for about 18 months, he explained, his voice smooth as polished marble. "She's brilliant with numbers. Absolutely brilliant." The compliment seemed to make my daughter uncomfortable. She shifted in her seat, eyes downcast. Something about this man set my teeth on edge. Perhaps it was the way he spoke about Thalia as if she weren't sitting right beside him, or how his eyes never quite settled on anything, constantly scanning the room as if expecting someone to approach. I'd spent decades reading people, a necessary skill for any teacher, and everything about Declan Merritt whispered caution. "And what exactly is your business?" I asked, directing my question to both of them. Thalia started to speak, but Declan answered first. "We identify investment opportunities that most financial advisors miss," he said. "High-yield, short-term commitments with exceptional returns. We've helped dozens of clients double or even triple their investments within months." The description sounded rehearsed, like a sales pitch he'd delivered many times before. It also sounded too good to be true, raising red flags in my mind. I'd lived through enough economic cycles to know that exceptional returns almost always came with exceptional risks. Vernon had taught me that fundamental truth early in our marriage when a sure-thing investment cost us 3 months' salary. "That sounds remarkable," I said carefully. "And is this related to the money you asked me for, Thalia?" My daughter's face flushed, and she shot Declan a look I couldn't interpret. "In a way," she admitted. "We had an opportunity that required quick action. That's why I needed the funds immediately." Declan leaned forward, his cologne, too strong, too sweet, making me suppress a cough. Mrs. Waverly, I understand your hesitation. Truly, I do. In your position, I'd ask questions too. But this particular investment window has closed now, unfortunately. He sighed dramatically, as if genuinely disappointed on my behalf. However, we have several other opportunities coming up that would be perfect for someone in your situation. A chill ran through me. My situation? What did this stranger know about my situation? Had Thalia shared details about my finances with this man? Before I could formulate a response, our meals arrived, temporarily halting the conversation. As we began to eat, I noticed Thalia barely touched her food, pushing it around her plate while Declan dominated the conversation with stories about successful investments and satisfied clients. He dropped names I assumed were meant to impress me, people from nearby towns who had apparently made small fortunes through his guidance. Halfway through the meal, Declan excused himself to take a phone call, leaving Thalia and me alone for the first time. What's really going on? I asked quickly, keeping my voice low. Who is this man? And why did you bring him to dinner? Thalia's eyes darted toward the door where Declan had exited. It's complicated, Mom, she whispered. Just be careful what you say to him. Before I could press further, Declan returned, his smile firmly in place. Now, Mrs. Waverly, he said, sliding back into his seat. Thalia tells me you have a substantial nest egg from your years of teaching, smart woman, preparing for the future. But let me ask you, is that money working as hard as you did to earn it? The directness of the question, the presumption behind it, sent a wave of indignation through me. This man wasn't just setting off alarm bells anymore. He was ringing every warning siren in my mind. I looked at Thalia, hoping for some explanation, but she was staring at her plate, shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself smaller. Are you on the edge of your seat, wondering what happens next? Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode of our dramatic family stories. Share this video with someone who appreciates complex family dynamics. Now, let's get back to Marjorie's dinner revelation. Mr. Merritt, I said, setting down my fork with deliberate calm. I don't discuss my personal finances with people I've just met, and I'm curious why you're so interested in my nest egg, as you call it. Declan's smile flickered for just a moment before returning to full wattage. Of course. Of course. Completely understandable. I only mention it because Thalia expressed concern that you might not be maximizing your returns in today's market. He turned to my daughter. Isn't that right, Thalia? My daughter nodded mechanically, still not meeting my eyes. Something was very wrong here. The Thalia I knew, even with our difficulties, was assertive, independent, not this subdued figure beside a man who spoke for her. I decided to change tactics. Tell me about this investment that required the $100,000, I said directly to Thalia. What exactly was it? Before Thalia could answer, Declan interjected. It was a real estate opportunity in an emerging market. Very exclusive. Limited window. His hand moved to cover Thalia's on the table, a gesture that appeared supportive but struck me as controlling. My daughter flinched almost imperceptibly at his touch. That tiny movement confirmed what my instincts had been screaming since they walked in. Thalia was afraid of this man. Actually, I said, looking directly at Declan. I'd like to hear from my daughter. I turned to Thalia. What was this investment, and why did you need my money specifically? Declan's hand tightened visibly on Thalia's before he withdrew it, his smile now fixed and brittle. Thalia took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. It wasn't just an investment opportunity. Mom. I owed money. A lot of money. The admission hung in the air between us. Declan's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing at Thalia. What your daughter means, he said quickly, is that we had capital obligations that needed to be met for our business venture. Thalia shook her head, seeming to find some reserve of courage. No, that's not what I mean, Declan. She looked at me directly for the first time that evening, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I made some bad investments. Really bad. I lost everything. My savings, my retirement fund. I even took out a second mortgage on my house. Her voice broke. And then Declan said he could help me recover it all, but I needed to invest more. He knew people, he said. Special opportunities. My heart sank as the pieces began to fall into place. This wasn't about a legitimate business deal. This was about my daughter being in serious financial trouble, possibly being manipulated by the man sitting across from me. Declan's friendly demeanor vanished entirely. Thalia, this isn't the time or place, he began, but I cut him off. I think it's exactly the time and place, I said firmly. My daughter called me in distress, asking for a large sum of money. Now I'm beginning to understand why. I turned to Thalia. How much do you owe? And to whom? Thalia's shoulders slumped. About 80,000 to the bank for the second mortgage. And she glanced nervously at Declan. Another 70,000 to investors Declan introduced me to. Declan's face had gone from charming to thunderous in the space of minutes. This is a private business matter, he snapped. With all due respect, Mrs. Waverly, you're interfering in something you don't understand. His tone made it clear that respect was the last thing he felt. I'd faced down enough belligerent parents and students over the years to recognize intimidation tactics when I saw them. What I understand, I replied evenly, is that my daughter appears to be in financial trouble, and you seem to have played a role in that. I looked at Thalia. Am I wrong? She shook her head, a single tear finally escaping to track down her cheek. It started small, she said. Declan was a client at my firm. He talked about these amazing investment opportunities. I put in a little money at first, and there were returns, good ones, so I invested more. But then things changed. The returns stopped coming. There were always excuses, complications. By the time I realized what was happening, I'd already lost most of my savings. Declan pushed back from the table abruptly. I don't have to listen to these accusations, he said, his voice tight with anger. Thalia, we're leaving. Now. My daughter didn't move. Instead, she looked at me with a mixture of shame and desperate hope that broke my heart. I'm not going anywhere with you, Declan, Thalia said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. This has gone on long enough. Declan leaned across the table, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Think carefully about what you're doing, Thalia. Remember our agreement. My protective instincts surged. I'd seen this dynamic before with troubled students. The subtle threats, the power imbalance. What agreement? I asked sharply. Thalia's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. Declan told me if I could get the money from you, he'd forgive part of what I owe to his associates. That's why I called you so desperately. She looked at me, shame written across her features. I'm sorry, Mom. I was scared. These people, they're not the kind you want to owe money to. The implication sent ice through my veins. What kind of people was my daughter involved with? Declan stood suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, drawing glances from nearby diners. This conversation is over, he said, reaching for Thalia's arm. I moved faster than I had in years, placing my hand firmly on his wrist. Don't touch my daughter, I said, my teacher's voice emerging, the one that could silence a room of rowdy teenagers with 3 words. Declan froze, clearly not expecting resistance from a 78-year-old woman. Mom, Thalia said urgently, you don't understand what he's capable of. But I did understand. I understood predators, having protected students from them throughout my career. I understood manipulation and fear tactics. Most importantly, I understood that my daughter was in trouble and needed me to be stronger than I'd ever been. Sit down, Mr. Merritt, I said calmly, or I'll call the manager over and explain that you're threatening us. I'm sure the local police would be interested as well. For a moment, Declan seemed to calculate his options. Then, with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes, he sat back down. Let's all calm down, he said, reverting to his smooth tone. This is just a misunderstanding between business partners. Thalia shook her head. No more lies, Declan. I've found the inconsistencies in the investment reports. I know the companies you claimed we were investing in don't exist. I've been gathering evidence for weeks. Declan's face changed, a flash of genuine alarm replacing his controlled expression. "You've been doing what?" Thalia straightened in her chair, something of her old confidence returning. "After Mom refused to send the money, I realized I needed to face reality. I spent the last 3 days documenting everything. The fake investment portfolios, the shell companies, the threatening messages from your associates when clients couldn't pay. I've already spoken with a lawyer and turned copies over to them." The color drained from Declan's face. "You're bluffing," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "I assure you she's not," I interjected. "My daughter has always been meticulous and thorough. It's one of her finest qualities." This wasn't entirely true. I had no idea what evidence Thalia had gathered, or if she'd really spoken to a lawyer. But I knew enough about confronting bullies to understand that showing a united front was crucial. Thalia reached into her purse and withdrew a flash drive, placing it on the table between them. "Everything's here and in several other secure locations," she added. "Copies of our correspondence, the fake company registrations, bank transfers. I was desperate enough to ask my mother for money, but not desperate enough to implicate her in your scheme. When she refused, it was the wake-up call I needed." Declan's eyes fixed on the flash drive, his jaw working silently. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its smooth confidence. "You have no idea what you're doing, Thalia. No idea who you're dealing with." The threat hung in the air, but Thalia didn't flinch. "Actually, I do now. And so do the authorities." Declan pushed back from the table again, this time standing slowly. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You'll regret this. Both of you." Without another word, he turned and strode toward the exit. We watched in silence, as he disappeared through the door. Only when he was gone did Thalia's composure crack. Her shoulders sagged, and she covered her face with her hands, silent sobs shaking her frame. I moved to the chair beside her, wrapping my arms around her as I had when she was small. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're not alone in this anymore." When Thalia's tears subsided, she wiped her eyes with the corner of her napkin. "I don't have a lawyer," she admitted quietly, "or copies in secure locations. Just this one flash drive, with what I've managed to piece together." I was bluffing. I couldn't help but smile slightly despite the gravity of the situation. "You always were good at poker. Your father never could tell when you were bluffing." At the mention of Vernon, Thalia's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Dad would be so disappointed in me," she whispered. I took her hand firmly in mine. "No," I said, with certainty. "He would be worried, yes, but disappointed, never. He would be proud of your courage today, standing up to that man." Thalia looked unconvinced. "After I got myself into this mess? After I tried to drag you into it too? How could anyone be proud of that?" "Because you told the truth. Finally," I said simply. "And because you're facing the consequences instead of running from them." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "Now, tell me everything, from the beginning. No more half-truths." Thalia took a deep, shuddering breath. "I met Declan 2 years ago at a financial conference in New York. He was charming, knowledgeable, or seemed to be. He talked about investment strategies I'd never considered, connections with international markets I couldn't access through normal channels." Her voice grew stronger as she continued, as if unburdening herself of the secret was physically lightening her load. "At first, everything seemed legitimate. The initial investments paid returns exactly as he promised. I started recommending him to a few select clients, trusted ones with the resources for higher-risk investments. Then gradually, things changed. The returns became irregular. Excuses piled up, delays in international transfers, regulatory issues, market fluctuations." "When did you realize it was a scam?" I asked gently. Thalia's face flushed with shame. "Far too late. By then, I'd invested most of my own money and had clients questioning where their investments had gone. Declan kept promising that one more injection of capital would solve everything, that the returns were coming. I took out the second mortgage on my house, believing I could save the situation, save my reputation." She looked down at her barely touched meal. "When that money was gone too, Declan suggested I approach family members for loans. He knew about you, about Dad's life insurance. Our house. He'd been collecting information about my background for months, planning for this moment. The realization that this man had been targeting my daughter, studying her vulnerabilities, made my blood boil, but I kept my voice calm, encouraging her to continue. 3 days ago, when you refused to send the money, I was devastated, Thalia admitted. I thought you were abandoning me when I needed you most. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Your hesitation, your questions, they forced me to face what I'd been avoiding for months. Her eyes met mine, clear and direct for the first time that evening. You saved me, Mom. If you'd sent that money, it would have disappeared like all the rest. Worse, you would have been pulled into this nightmare. After our call, I started looking at everything more critically, gathering documents, downloading emails. The more I looked, the more obvious the fraud became. I was just too close to see it, too desperate to admit I'd been duped. The waiter approached, asking if we wanted dessert. We both declined, asking instead for coffee. As he cleared our plates, I processed everything Thalia had told me, my mind racing with implications and concerns. What about your clients? I asked when we were alone again. The ones whose money you invested with Declan? Thalia's expression grew pained. 3 main clients. Together they invested about $400,000. I've been avoiding their calls for weeks. I don't know how I'll face them, how I'll ever repay them. The magnitude of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just about Thalia's personal finances. Her professional reputation, possibly even her legal standing, was in jeopardy. What you said about speaking to authorities, was that completely a bluff too? I asked. She shook her head. Not completely. I've been researching how to report investment fraud. I know I need to go to the SEC, maybe the FBI, but I've been scared. Once I file reports, everything becomes real. I could lose my license, face lawsuits from clients. I might even face criminal charges for my part in it, even though I didn't know it was a scam. The weight of her predicament hung heavy in the air between us. My daughter, my brilliant, ambitious daughter, had made terrible mistakes, had trusted the wrong person, had compromised her integrity in trying to fix her errors. But looking at her across the table, I didn't see a fraudster. I saw my child in pain, trying to find her way back from a dark place. We need to call the police tonight, I said firmly. That man threatened you. Both of us, actually. And we need to report the investment fraud immediately. Thalia looked terrified. Tonight? But I'm not prepared. I haven't organized all the evidence. I haven't consulted a lawyer. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. Thalia, listen to me. The longer this continues, the worse it gets. Declan now knows you've gathered evidence against him. Do you really think he's going to wait patiently while you consult attorneys and organize your documentation? He's going to disappear with everyone's money, or he's going to try to silence you. This story takes an unexpected turn. If you're finding yourself invested in Marjorie and Thalia's journey, please give this video a thumbs up and comment below with your thoughts on family trust and forgiveness. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that explore complex family dynamics. The police station in Crestfall hadn't changed much since the last time I'd been there, 20 years earlier when I'd reported vandalism at the high school. Officer Donovan, now with silver at his temples, recognized me immediately. Mrs. Waverly. It's been a while. His friendly smile faded as he took in our serious expressions. What brings you ladies in tonight? Thalia, clutching the flash drive in her hand like a talisman, stepped forward. I need to report an investment fraud scheme, she said, her voice steady despite the slight tremble in her fingers. I was involved in it. Unwittingly at first, but I continued even after I began to suspect something was wrong. Officer Donovan's eyebrows rose slightly, but his professional demeanor remained intact. This sounds like something we should discuss in private, he said, leading us to a small interview room with uncomfortable plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting that did no favors for Thalia's exhausted face. For the next 2 hours, Thalia laid out everything. Her initial meetings with Declan, the early investments and returns, the gradual realization that something was wrong, the clients whose money was now lost. She explained her desperate attempt to get money from me, and finally, Declan's veiled threats at dinner. Officer Donovan took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. He seemed particularly interested in the names of Declan's associates and any communications Thalia had with them. "This is beyond our jurisdiction," he finally said, setting down his pen. "Investment fraud on this scale involves federal authorities. I'll file the initial report and forward everything to the FBI field office in Richmond. They'll want to interview you extensively, Miss Waverly." He looked at Thalia with unexpected kindness. "I appreciate your coming forward. It takes courage to admit mistakes of this magnitude." As we left the police station, the weight of what had just happened seemed to hit Thalia fully. She stopped on the sidewalk, swaying slightly as if she might collapse. I put my arm around her waist, supporting her as I had when she was learning to walk. "Let's get you home," I said gently. "You can stay with me tonight." She nodded, too emotionally drained to speak. The drive to my house passed in silence, both of us processing the evening's revelations in our own way. Once inside, Thalia sank onto the living room sofa, the same one she'd curled up on as a teenager reading books or watching movies with Vernon and me. "I've ruined everything," she whispered, staring at her hands. "My career, my reputation, my finances. I'll probably lose my house. I might even go to jail." The defeat in her voice broke my heart. This wasn't the confident, sometimes arrogant daughter I knew. This was someone beaten down by her own mistakes and betrayal. "You haven't ruined everything," I said firmly, sitting beside her. "You've made serious mistakes, yes. There will be difficult consequences, certainly. But you've taken the first step toward making things right by going to the police." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "As for the practical matters, your house, your finances, we'll figure those out together." Thalia looked up sharply. "Mom, I can't ask you for help, not after what I tried to do." I smiled slightly. "You're not asking. I'm offering. There's a difference." I took her hand, noticing how similar it was to my own. The same long fingers, the same slight curve to the knuckles. "Besides, I'm not suggesting I simply hand over money. I'm suggesting we work together to create a plan. You have skills, Thalia. You have education and experience. This is a setback, not the end." She didn't look convinced, but some of the despair left her eyes. "The first priority is dealing with the legal implications," I continued. "Tomorrow morning we'll call Patricia Hernandez." At Thalia's questioning look, I explained. "She was a student of mine, graduated about 25 years ago. She's now one of the top attorneys in Richmond, specializing in white-collar crime. She'll know how to proceed." Thalia shook her head in wonder. "You still keep in touch with your students after all these years?" I couldn't help but smile. "Some of them. The ones who made an impression." I didn't add that I'd kept track of Thalia's former classmates more closely than she realized, partly out of professional interest, but partly to have news to share with her during our increasingly rare conversations. "After we speak with Patricia, we'll need to contact your clients," I added. Thalia flinched visibly. "I can't face them, Mom. I can't tell them I lost their money." "You can, and you will," I said, my teacher voice emerging again. "Not because it will be easy, but because it's right. And because if there's any chance of salvaging your professional reputation, it begins with honesty." I squeezed her hand. "I'll go with you if you want. Not to speak for you, but to support you." Tears welled in Thalia's eyes. "Why are you helping me like this, after what I tried to do?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with years of distance and misunderstandings. "Because you're my daughter," I said simply. "Because despite our differences, despite the distance that's grown between us, I have never stopped loving you. And because everyone deserves a chance to make amends, to rebuild." Thalia broke then, sobbing in earnest, decades of emotion pouring out as I held her, my own tears falling silently into her hair. Morning came with pale autumn sunlight streaming through the guest room curtains. Thalia emerged, looking rumpled but more rested, the dark circles under her eyes slightly less pronounced. I had already made coffee and was sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad, making notes and lists, a habit from my teaching days that had served me well through life's challenges. "You're already planning," Thalia observed, pouring herself coffee from the pot. I nodded. "It helps me think. We have a lot to address." She sat across from me, wrapping her hands around the mug as if drawing strength from its warmth. "I called Patricia," I told her. "She can see us at 11. Thalia's eyebrows rose. "Just like that? No waiting list?" I smiled slightly. "I mentioned it was urgent, and that it involved you." "She remembers me?" Thalia asked, surprised. I nodded. "She was 2 years behind you in school. Said you were something of a legend in the math department after you won that state competition." A flicker of the old Thalia, proud, confident, crossed her face before fading back into uncertainty. "That was a lifetime ago," she murmured. We finished our coffee in companionable silence before preparing for the day ahead. The meeting with Patricia was both worse and better than I'd expected. Worse, because she didn't sugarcoat the potential consequences Thalia faced: possible civil lawsuits from clients, potential SEC fines, even criminal charges if prosecutors believed she had knowingly participated in the fraud. Better, because Patricia's calm, methodical approach gave us a framework, a path forward through the legal minefield ahead. "The fact that you reported this voluntarily works in your favor," Patricia explained, her professional demeanor reminding me of the serious young student she'd once been. "As does the evidence you've gathered against the primary perpetrator. Your best strategy is complete transparency and cooperation with authorities." She outlined the steps Thalia needed to take: formal statements to the FBI and SEC, documented timelines of all interactions with Declan, full disclosure to clients. "It won't be easy," she warned. "But it's the only way through this with any hope of preserving your future in finance, if that's what you still want." Thalia nodded, taking notes with the same focused intensity she'd shown as a student. I felt a surge of pride watching her face this crisis head-on, no longer hiding from the truth or seeking easy escapes. When we left Patricia's office, Thalia seemed lighter somehow, as if having a plan, however difficult, had restored some of her equilibrium. "What's next on your list?" she asked, as we got into my car. I consulted my notes. "Client meetings," I said. "Patricia recommended doing them together with her present." Thalia's momentary confidence faltered. "Today?" I shook my head. "Patricia needs time to prepare, and so do you. But she's contacting them today to schedule meetings for tomorrow." Thalia leaned back against the headrest, closing her eyes briefly. "I don't know what to say to them. Sorry I lost your life savings seems inadequate." I pulled onto the main road, navigating the familiar streets of my hometown. "Start with the truth," I suggested. "The complete truth, including your own mistakes and the steps you're taking to make things right. People can be surprisingly forgiving when they feel they're being respected with honesty." Thalia didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "And after that?" she asked, clearly trying to focus on the concrete steps ahead rather than drowning in the magnitude of her situation. "You'll need to consider your financial position," I said carefully. "The second mortgage, your savings, potential legal fees." Thalia's face clouded. "There's nothing to consider. I'm ruined, Mom. Once this is over, I'll have nothing left." I glanced at her before turning my attention back to the road. "That's not necessarily true. You have options." I hesitated before continuing. "I've been thinking about this all morning. The 100,000 you asked for. I couldn't give it to you then under those circumstances. But I can help now, in a different way." Thalia started to protest, but I held up one hand from the steering wheel. "Hear me out. I'm not suggesting I simply hand over money to disappear into this mess. I'm proposing a partnership of sorts." I explained my idea as we drove. How I could help restructure her debt, possibly using my house as collateral for a loan that would allow her to begin repaying clients while legal proceedings continued. "In return," I continued, "you would move back to Crestfall temporarily. Live with me, help me maintain the house, which is becoming difficult at my age. Use your financial expertise to manage my accounts and investments properly for the future. I pulled into the driveway of my home, our family home, and turned to face her. It's not charity, Thalia. It's a practical arrangement that benefits us both. Thalia stared at me, her expression unreadable. You'd trust me with your finances? After what I've done. The question hung between us, heavy with implication. I met her gaze steadily. I trust that you've learned a painful lesson about integrity. I trust that you won't make the same mistakes again. Most importantly, I trust the daughter I raised, the one who's sitting beside me now, facing her mistakes instead of running from them. Tears welled in Thalia's eyes. I don't deserve this chance, she whispered. I reached across to take her hand. It's not about deserving, Thalia. It's about moving forward. About healing, not just your finances or your career, but us. This distance between us has gone on too long. I squeezed her fingers gently. Besides, your father would never forgive me if I didn't do everything possible to help you now. At the mention of Vernon, Thalia smiled through her tears. He always said you were the strongest person he knew. I'm starting to understand what he meant. We sat in silence for a moment, the autumn sunlight dappling through the old maple tree that had shaded this driveway for decades. So I said finally, partners? Thalia took a deep breath, seeming to gather her courage, and nodded. Partners, she agreed. As we walked toward the house together, I felt a weight lifting, not just Thalia's burden of secrets and shame, but my own fears of failing her, of losing her completely to the distance that had grown between us. Snow dusted the windowsills of my kitchen, the first real accumulation of the winter. From where I sat at the table, I could see Thalia in the backyard, clearing a path to the bird feeders Vernon had installed years ago. She worked methodically, her breath clouding in the cold December air. 3 months had passed since that revelatory dinner. 3 months of legal meetings, client confrontations, FBI interviews, and financial restructuring. 3 months of difficult conversations, painful admissions, and gradual healing between mother and daughter. Patricia had been right. The voluntary disclosure and Thalia's cooperation with authorities had made a significant difference. While the legal proceedings against Declan continued, he had been arrested trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. Thalia had received assurance that she would likely face only civil penalties rather than criminal charges. The client meetings had been as difficult as expected. Anger, betrayal, and distrust directed at Thalia in varying degrees of intensity. Yet our proposed repayment plan, backed by the equity in my house and a portion of my savings, had been cautiously accepted. It would take years to repay everything, but it was a path forward. More surprising was how Thalia had thrown herself into life in Crestfall. After the initial shock and adjustment, she had begun to rebuild not just her financial life, but her connection to the community she'd left behind. She volunteered at the high school, coaching the math team using skills that had nothing to do with her financial career and everything to do with her natural talents. She joined me for dinners with old friends like Beatrice, bringing a perspective that bridged generations. And most significantly, she and I had begun to rediscover each other, not as the people we had been, but as the women we had become. Thalia came back inside, stamping snow from her boots on the mat. The birds will be able to reach their feeders now, she announced, unwinding her scarf. Though I don't know why they can't just eat off the ground like sensible creatures. I smiled, pouring her a cup of hot tea from the pot on the table. Because Vernon believed birds deserved special treatment. According to him, they sing for their supper. Thalia accepted the tea gratefully, warming her hands on the mug. Dad and his theories, she said with fond exasperation. Remember how he insisted that fireflies communicated in Morse code? We both laughed at the memory, one of many we'd revisited in recent months. The easy domesticity between us still felt new and fragile at times, but increasingly natural as weeks passed. Patricia called while you were outside, I said, returning to my own tea. The SEC has accepted the settlement offer. Thalia's expression shifted, relief and regret mingling on her features. The settlement was substantial, all her remaining assets plus 5 years of repayments. but it closed one chapter of the legal nightmare. That's good news, she said quietly. One down, two to go. The FBI investigation of Declan and his network continued, as did negotiations with the one client who had refused our initial repayment plan. One step at a time, I reminded her. Our shared mantra for the overwhelming process of rebuilding. She nodded, sipping her tea thoughtfully. I had a call from Boston yesterday, she said, after a moment. A job offer from my old firm's competitor. They've been following the case, apparently. Said they were impressed with how I've handled it. I tried to keep my expression neutral, though my heart constricted at the thought of her leaving again so soon. That's wonderful, I managed. What position? Thalia set down her mug. Junior advisor. A significant step down from where I was, with about half the salary, but a chance to rebuild my career. She studied my face carefully. I turned it down. Surprise must have shown in my expression because she continued quickly, at least for now. I told them I have commitments here that I need to honor first. She reached across the table to cover my hand with hers. Our partnership agreement, remember? Besides, I'm not ready to leave yet. There's still too much unfinished business, too much healing left to do. The relief I felt was embarrassingly strong. Selfish, perhaps, but real. The offer will still be there when you're ready, I said, believing it to be true. Talent like yours doesn't go unrecognized for long. Thalia smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, something that had been rare in those first difficult weeks. Meanwhile, I was thinking we might consider a small business venture here. At my questioning look, she continued, financial literacy education for high school students and young adults. The school superintendent mentioned they've been looking for someone to develop a curriculum. Her enthusiasm was infectious as she outlined her ideas: workshops, one-on-one counseling, partnerships with local banks. I've learned the hard way what happens when people don't understand money management, she said. Maybe I can help others avoid similar mistakes. I listened, nodding, recognizing in her passion the same drive that had once taken her away from Crestfall, now channeled into something that might keep her connected to it. As evening settled over the house, we moved to the living room, where photographs of our family through the years lined the walls and shelves. Thalia stopped before one I'd always loved, Vernon holding 3-year-old Thalia on his shoulders at the county fair, both of them laughing. I've been thinking about what Dad would say about all this, she said softly. About my mistakes, the consequences, our reconciliation. I joined her, studying the image of the man we'd both loved in our different ways. He would say that making mistakes isn't what defines us, I replied. It's how we respond to them that matters. And he would be proud of how you faced this, with courage and integrity, despite the cost. Thalia leaned against my shoulder lightly, a gesture of affection that had become more natural between us over the past months. He would also say that you were right to deny me that money, she added wryly. That sometimes the most loving answer is no. I put my arm around her shoulders, remembering the desperate phone call that had started this journey, the painful dinner that had revealed the truth, and all the difficult days that followed. The money was never really the issue, I said. It was trust, honesty, respect. What any relationship needs to survive, especially between parent and child. Thalia nodded, understanding in her eyes that wouldn't have been there 4 months ago. I'm glad you said no, Mom, she said quietly. As painful as all this has been, I needed to face it, not just the legal and financial consequences, but my own choices. If you had rescued me then, I might never have learned what I needed to learn. Outside, snow continued to fall softly, covering Crestfall in a blanket of white that made everything look new and clean. Inside, mother and daughter stood together, finding their way back to each other through the wreckage of mistakes and misunderstandings, building something new from what remained. In the meantime, on the final screen, I'm leaving you with 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until now.